What is up, guys? Casey here with the Coyote Works channel. Well, I hope you guys are going to enjoy this video that I have coming up for you. But first, real quick, a couple of business items. Number one, for any of you that are interested in making a monetary contribution to my channel, there's a PayPal donate link in the description down below. All that money goes directly back into the cost of my channel and just helps me keep my channel independent and free of paid sponsorships. The second thing is I do have Coyote Works merchandise available for sale at the Jeep Overland Outfitters website. Look for the Coyote Works merch there. Now there's t-shirts, soon there will be hats, hoodies, etc. there. Outside of that, man, hope you guys enjoy this video. How's it going, guys? Casey here with the Coyote Works channel. Well, thanks for tuning back in to watch part 2 of this video series. In part 1, I left my home smack dab in the middle of Central Oregon and headed south. I drove east for a ways on Highway 20, then south on Highway 395. I went through the little town of Valley Falls, and then just north of Lakeview, Oregon, I turned west, headed across the small mountain range and into the little town of Adel. I planned on getting my last fuel in Adel, but as luck would have it, the store was closed there. So bound and determined to have a good trip anyway, I headed on out into the desert with the amount of fuel that I had. I had a great night, but woke up to some surprise snow the next day that I wasn't expecting. I did some good exploring, found some cool ruins, and towards the end of the next day is where we pick up here in part 2. I hope you guys enjoy the next couple of days of the journey. I know I sure did. Little bit of a rocky ledge to climb up here. God, I'm thinking this road could just be kind of rocky for a while. It was at that point in the trip that both the weather conditions and the trail conditions began deteriorating rapidly. Not too long after that, I found myself in a position where I was in some of the worst possible country to be trying to find a camping place in that kind of weather. And on top of that, I was in country I was completely unfamiliar with, and I had no idea what kind of condition the trails were in up ahead of me, but they seemed to be deteriorating more and more by the mile. I needed to find a passable route down off of that wide open rocky plateau and into some country where I'd have a little bit of a break from the driving weather. Eventually I got onto a track that was actually an old wagon road. The good news about that is I was pretty sure it was going to come out the other side somewhere. The bad news is wagons are a lot narrower than modern vehicles, so some scouting was in order to make sure I had enough clearance to squeeze my Jeep through there. I've learned over the years that taking the time to get out and walk a questionable section of trail can save me countless hours and oftentimes a bunch of heartache on the other end. Especially in a situation like this where I'm entering in a little bit of a narrow little canyon. What I don't want to do is get down to the other end, get bottlenecked in, and be forced to back up a long ways over rough terrain. Walking a section of trail like this is also just a great opportunity for me to get out of the Jeep, stretch my legs a little bit, and look a little closer at the ground for any artifacts or clues that might have been left behind by those that traveled this trail over the years. All right, dang, that was a little bit of a rough stretch. Well, we are through it, and it looks like this little valley is opening up out here now. And one other thing is, right in the mouth of this little canyon is not a bad place to camp. So I'm going to keep this in mind. I'm going to keep rolling forward, but this could really open up out there, and I may run back up in here and camp tonight. Most of the time, I'm pretty content to deal with whatever kind of conditions the trails throw at me out there. But at this particular moment, I was starting to get just a little bit frustrated. The trail was rough enough that I couldn't make very good time, and I knew I was running out of daylight and running out of time to find a decent spot to camp. But as it were, I was following an old wagon road, and it wasn't long before I started thinking about the journey that those early settlers would have had traveling that same road. A covered wagon or a buckboard pulled by a team of horses in country like that would have been lucky to make 10 to 15 miles in an entire day. And over the course of that distance, the occupants of those vehicles would feel every bump, they'd breathe every bit of dust, and they would experience the full force of every bit of weather that Mother Nature would throw at them. Well, hell, I've got about 40 minutes left of daylight and I don't have a camp spot yet. And this country that I'm going through is just wide open, and now I've got snow again and blowing wind, so oh dear Lord. Well, I guess in typical fashion I'll be rolling into camp with barely enough light, which is a bummer because I wanted to cook a nice dinner and everything tonight, but man, I'm a little worried about the wind and the weather. One of the things I've always loved about the desert country is the diversity of the terrain. I had started that day way up in some rocky hills, wandered across a desolate, wide open rocky plateau, and now, towards the end of the day, I was cruising across a wide open, perfectly flat alkali lake bed. A couple more miles down the road and I dropped into another basin, and not too long after that, and just in the nick of time, with the light fading fast. Alright, well, it's definitely not the best campsite I've ever had, but truth be told, it's not the worst either. I got a nice view down into the valley down there. I got a little bit of protection from this little canyon I'm in, or this little draw I'm in, so it'll work. I'm going to whip together a fire reflective wall, get a fire going, get my rooftop tent stood up, and I got to do this pretty fast, so I don't know that I'll do much filming. So I'll catch you guys back in a bit. Alright guys, well, it is snowing again. Not real heavy, but it is coming down. So what I'm going to do for dinner tonight is something really easy, but it's another one of my favorites. It's I'm going to do chili dogs. So I've got a couple of hot dogs here. I'm just going to toss those in a pan, and I'm actually going old school heating my chili. I've got it sitting down on a rock by the fire. Sometimes going low tech is actually the way to go, and this way I won't dirty too many dishes. I don't have to dirty a pan, and that'll work just fine. Got to turn my chili every once in a while. Oh yeah, getting nice and warm. I toasted my buns on the fire. My hot dogs are ready. I'm going to throw these on, and the chili's ready. So I put the cheese right on top of the buns so that when I pour the chili on top of it, it'll melt everything. Oh yeah, that's nice and warm. All right, chili. Oh yeah, perfect. Look at that. Piping hot chili dog. Now, it's freezing out here, so I don't want to screw around too much here. Let's see how this is. That is delicious. So to me, chili dogs, one of those classic camp meals. Relatively easy to prepare, very little mess, and really good on a cold day like this. Now thankfully the wind died down, so I'm not battling the wind tonight. Life doesn't get much better than this. Hot meal, cold night, out in the middle of nowhere, miles and miles and miles away from anyone else, but still in relative comfort. It really is amazing how comfortable you can be out here. It's actually turned into a really nice night out here. I finished my dinner. Just gonna sit here, kick back by the fire, and enjoy a nice refreshing hint. Tonight I'm working on the blackberry one. I was reminiscent about today and thinking about that trail, and that was a pretty rough trail. There was another side trip that I think would have taken me to another homestead, but I was running short on time, so I didn't end up making it to it. I'm also going to grab my inReach, pair it up with my phone, and send a message out just to let my buddy know that I'm safe and in camp for the evening. Just do a quick check-in. So I'm going to do that, enjoy my little tasty evening beverage, and then slip up into the rooftop tent. All right, well, I got cleaned up a little bit and ready for bed. It's actually pretty early. I think it's only about 8 o'clock. So I thought I would just lounge in here. It's snowing again outside, not terrible or anything, but I feel pretty good about the position that I'm in tonight, a little bit better than where I was last night. From here, it's either downhill or relatively level most of the way out to a main road. So, and at this point, I'm only about 25 miles off of a paved road, or I think about 25 miles, maybe 30, off of a paved road. Now, granted, it's a paved road that gets hardly any traffic, but probably at least a car or two a day. So I feel pretty good about my position. And one of the things I usually always do in the evening, or one of the things I enjoy doing in the evenings, is a little bit of map recon. So I've got my Gaia GPS up, and I'm looking at actually kind of where I'm camped, and I'm not too far away from something that looks pretty interesting. Looking over the route that I traveled, so I pioneered a pretty good chunk of this route. Ultimately, I'd like to find a route. It's going to be, at the end of the day, probably somewhere around 160, 165 miles, but I need to connect through between 2 points. And obviously, I don't think I'm going to get all the way there on this trip, but I did get a good chunk of the southern portion of the route figured out, and I've got, another 2 days or so to work on it. So we'll see what tomorrow brings. So I know I showed you guys this before, but people ask me this question all of the time. So a couple of things that I like to have handy when I go to sleep: some kind of a blaster. This one's my Faxon FX19 that I've done a little bit of add-ons to. Kind of made it a quasi Roland special type of a build. So I like to have a handgun, obviously a good flashlight, a knife. Usually I always have my phone, my lighter, and my keys all in one little pile, so that basically if I had to bail out of my tent at night, I know I can grab that little pile of stuff and my clothes for the next day, and I'm all good to go. Another thing is, I do set my change of clothes for the morning right on top, and then that's for two reasons. One, so I don't have to mess around. I do all my organization in the evening, but the second reason is, again, just in case I did have to bail out at night, I know where I can reach and at least grab a change of clothes. So have some clothes, some basic survival gear, no matter what happens, even if I had to bail out of my tent in a hurry. I think I'm just going to relax and read a little bit until I get nice and drowsy, and then probably roll off to sleep a little bit early tonight and hit the trail fairly early tomorrow. Well, good morning, guys. It's about 4:30, and I slept like a baby last night. So I think I'm just going to finish off my coffee. I'm having the usual little bit of instant coffee mixed up in a water bottle. Actually heated it up a little bit over my heater. Finish my coffee, get dressed. I think I'm going to roll out of the tent. It's still a couple hours before it gets light, but I think I'll get breakfast out of the way and everything so that I can start packing up camp and roll, because this next section of the country that we're going into today, I'm really excited about, and I want to make sure that I have a lot of time to explore in there, or as much as possible given the short days. And then outside of that, I also would like to get into camp a little bit early tonight and really relax. Today is actually Thanksgiving. I'm going to have a nice Thanksgiving dinner tonight in camp, and I'd like to get into camp a little bit early so I can really enjoy it and do some relaxing. All right, guys, I'm just going to douse a little bit of hand sanitizer. Got this little tinder bundle right here. There we go. Boy, I'm telling you guys, it is cold out here this morning. I bet it's down around 20, maybe even high teens, it feels like. A nice little fire going though. That'll help. That'll help. Well, as typical out in this country, it's getting the coldest right when it first gets light. So it's about 7 o'clock right now, maybe just a couple of minutes after 7, and I can feel the temperatures drop down another couple of degrees. The other thing is I can see some snow hitting the top of this next range up here. So I'm going to have a little bit of breakfast, and then I probably won't screw around too long. I'll get my camp tore down and I'll get on down the road for a couple of reasons. One, because I'd like to get my camp tore down before a snow comes in, if it's going to. And number two, I want to get up into that next area. Oh, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah, I'm definitely doing the epitome of the socially distanced Thanksgiving holiday this year. All right, I got some oatmeal this morning. I'm going to have some Umpqua oats and some Mountain House scrambled eggs with bacon. Just wanted to do a really simple meal this morning. Again, I'm working to get out of camp fairly quickly, but I was just sitting here and the sun's starting to come up into the... I've got this huge rim out in front of me, and the sun is just behind it, and the clouds are starting to part a little bit. And I think I might, with a little luck, I might end up with a pretty amazing sunrise this morning. So I might just chill here for a little bit and enjoy it. All right, camp is all buttoned up. The sun's just up over the rim over there. So I just gotta kick the fire over a little bit and then we're out of here. All right, guys, we are on the road. So we've got about, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 miles or so to get into the next area where I want to camp. For part of the way, the road conditions should be pretty good, but part of the way, the road conditions will be unknown. So I don't really have any idea how long it will take us, but it's a little bit after 8 right now, so hopefully it should give us plenty of time to get into that area, do some scouting around, and find a nice camp spot for tonight. All right, so I just hit a stretch of the good road. So I've got about probably 25 miles or so, maybe 20 miles of this road that's pretty well maintained. I wouldn't call it pretty well maintained, but somewhat maintained, and it's a fairly good road. The scenery along this road is just incredible. Off on my right, I've got this big old range rising up. It's actually the tail end of the Pueblo Mountains rising up out of the valley, and the road I'm cruising up is running north just along the west side of that range. Beautiful, just breathtaking. I had some miles to cover before I got to my first point of interest that I wanted to explore for the day. I had really high hopes for that area. I'd found some pretty interesting indications on the map that I was highly likely to find a really cool historic site, and it was far enough off the beaten path that I was pretty certain not too many people would have explored it yet. But while I was anxious to get to that spot and get my boots dirty doing some exploring, I also was thoroughly enjoying the drive on the way there. I passed a couple of wild horses here and there, a few antelope, a few herds of cattle, and eventually I started getting on more secondary roads. Shortly after that, I turned off of the secondary roads onto the network of old, barely used historic trails that would lead me into the area. And eventually, even those old secondary roads disappeared and I lost all sign of them. Alright, so I just caught sight of this out across this lake bed out here, and I want to show you something that I found. This is the coolest thing I've found yet on this trip. I actually caught sight of this from all the way across the lake bed out there. And this is what caught my eye because the sun was glinting off of it. And what it is it's part of an old stove, a really old one. But then what's really cool is what I see right over there. Come check this out. Uh-oh, look at this. Oh, I just love finding stuff like this. So on my way over to check out this really cool thing, but I saw this, so I had to show you guys. Look, this is an old frying pan. Some old homesteader cooked up their hardtack and salt pork in this thing. Pretty crazy. We'll leave it right there. This is absolutely incredible. This is one of the more intact ruins that I found out in this area. A lot of times I find these, but they're just in piles. And this one, most of the walls are still standing. There's even an old rough handmade cabinet inside there. Just amazing to think this was somebody's home, and actually not a bad spot. Looking out over this lake, probably on moister years, there was standing water out there in that lake. Nice feed for the cattle. It was probably a really amazing spot at one time. Back when they first homesteaded this country was after a period of moister years, so a lot of these places like this still had a lot of green, lush grass around them. Look at this wood framed windows here. So the homesteaders got out here when it was a period of time when there'd been a number of unseasonably wet years out in this country. So when a lot of the homesteaders first arrived out here, there was a lot more grass and it was a lot more greener, and there was a lot more water out here than there is in normal times. A lot of these dry lake beds like this one right here probably would have had standing water on it. And this homesteader, whoever homesteaded this site right here, they arrived on the side of what would have looked like a permanent lake out here, set up a homestead, put all this work into it, and then within a few years, the climate patterns turned back to normal. The area dried out, and then within probably just another year or two after normal climate patterns, it was impossible to make a living out here anymore. So within a very short period of time, all of these homesteaders starved out and headed back to the cities. I think here, this was an old root cellar. You can still see part of the stone wall here. And then there's a big hole down here. I can see bits of the old stone wall all around it. I got some charred pieces of wood and stuff in here, so I'm thinking this probably burned at one point. You can see a fire raged across here, probably several over the years. A lot of grass fires out across this country, so I bet this fire came across here, burned all of the wood, the roof collapsed, and then eventually the walls started collapsing in. Alright, well that was a pretty cool stop. Now I'm going to get myself caffeinated up and hit some more miles. Got this new La Colombe. This is a draft latte, so we'll see how this guy is. Not bad. And then, because you can never have too much caffeine, I'm gonna top it off with some cold brew. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. Yeah, this is pretty incredible out here. I wish it wasn't so early. It's actually just about 11 o'clock. If it was a little later in the day, I would just go ahead and camp here, but I'm gonna get some more miles in. Man, I just love this area in here. All these little canyons, rim rocks, really cool. Just a little bit different scenery and topography in here, but very cool. So anyway, guys, we're gonna make some time and see if we can get to the next point of interest. Okay guys, well, I'm gonna go and toss the last of my gas in, which I hate to do, but I'm pushing it. I was doing a calculation on mileage, and to Burns, Oregon, I'm probably gonna need almost exactly every little bit of gas that I have. So today is Thanksgiving, so there's not gonna be any gas stations open probably. So I'm gonna dump this in, and hopefully this will get me to someplace to camp tonight and enough fuel to get myself back into Burns tomorrow. God, I can't believe it's how beautiful it is out here. I love this country, these rim rocks and these wide open valleys cut up with these rim rocks. You can just see forever, and off over in the distance over there I can see the snow-capped Steens Mountains. I don't know if they'll show up on camera at all, but man, they are just breathtaking. Boom! All in all, it had just been an amazing day of exploring, but the shadows were getting long and it was time for me to start thinking about a campsite for the night. I really wanted to find a truly spectacular campsite for my last night out in that part of the desert. But as fate would have it, and in what was becoming the theme for this trip, things just did not go according to plan. So I did what any good overlander does. I took my lemons and I turned them into lemonade. All right, well, check this out. This is tonight's camp spot. After searching long and hard, I finally found one that has good shelter from the weather, that's actually pretty good climate control. So I just rolled in here. To fill you guys in, basically I got way up north on my route and it was getting dark fast, and I got into an area where there was a whole bunch of private land and I just could not find any place to camp. So this happens occasionally when you go on these trips and you don't have pre-designated routes or camping areas. You never know what's going to happen. So I just rerouted to the nearest little town that had a hotel in it, and this is where I'll be spending my Thanksgiving evening. So man, I cannot tell you guys how good that first shower feels when you get back to civilization. So it won't be bad. I've got some good snacks here. I'll chill out in here, probably do some Instagram posting, a little bit of video editing maybe, and call it a Thanksgiving. And then tomorrow I'll embark on the last leg of my journey back home. I couldn't even tell you exactly what it is, but I can tell you that I've always really enjoyed that experience of rolling off of the desert into some little small town and grabbing a hotel room for a night. So the next morning I woke up refreshed as I embarked on the last leg of my journey. And all in all, I ended up really enjoying that last day's travel. I took some side routes and drove some roads that I'd never driven before. And along the way, at one point, I was treated with the sight of one of the largest herds of antelope that I'd ever seen spread out across the farmer's pivot out there. My only real priority objective for the day was to see some new country and to make one stop and recon a mine site that I'd been to in the past. It was a huge site spread out across several foothills of a fairly large butte system out there. So what I wanted to do was use my drone to do some pretty serious recon of the site. So I spent an hour or so there flying my drone back and forth, and I'll show you guys a little bit more about that experience in another video. This ended up being one of those trips where right out of the gate things started going wrong, and things just continued to go sideways through the entirety of the trip. From the gas station being closed in Adel at the very beginning of the trip, to forgetting some of the food that I was looking forward to eating, to not being able to find a campsite the last night and heading on into Burns to hit a hotel room. But in spite of everything that went wrong, in spite of everything that didn't go according to plan, I ended up really enjoying the trip, as I almost always do. In fact, what I've found over the years is that some of my most enjoyable trips are the ones where things didn't go according to plan. I also find that you don't find yourself telling stories around the campfire about the trips where everything went perfectly. The trips with the worst mishaps make for the best campfire stories, and there's a certain feeling of satisfaction that you only get from overcoming a certain amount of adversity. So I hope you all enjoyed joining me for this adventure. I know I sure enjoyed having you all along. I look forward to your comments, your questions, and above all, I look forward to seeing you on the next adventure. And until then, Coyote Works, out.